was looking forward personally to chairing this session with a speaker of his reputation and hearing what he had to say. Now, these sort of people are extremely busy. They're sort of a bit like media stars, and they seem sometimes to be prone to what airlines call double booking. And on Tuesday, we started to get worried, and he was saying he was having trouble with flight cancellations, and his travel agent was looking for alternatives. On the web, we could find flights that came here from Philadelphia to Antalya yesterday with seats that we could have booked, but we got confirmation yesterday afternoon from him that he would not be coming. The title of his talk was Predicting the Unpredictable. So the program committee had to face up to the unpredictable. Now, you don't replace a speaker like that. You just have to do something different. We have many excellent speakers available in Antalya, and maybe they don't have the full breadth of vision of David Farber, but they know really many subjects in many great details. And we have decided to present you with two things in this final session. Well, actually, before we get to what we're really going to do, we did have one other thought. We said, what would the audience really like? So somebody said, bring back the dancers. Now, you'll be very disappointed to know that they were already booked up for this morning. So the idea is to ask Ken Klingenstein to summarize the middleware tracks that have been going on at this conference, because many of us feel that this whole question of the introduction of middleware in its different aspects is important for everybody in the audience, and he's agreed at short notice to do that, and I'm sure that we are going to enjoy it. And he'll talk for order of magnitude 15 minutes. After that, we will have a debate with four excellent speakers, and they will be discussing put it brutally, IP or not IP, that is the question. I'll introduce those speakers to you after Ken has told us about middleware. Ken. Ken is from the University of Colorado at Boulder, and he's very heavily involved in Internet too as well.
Thank you, David. I have been fortunate to be on the frontier now 3 times in my life. I was at the University of California in Berkeley getting my PhD in the late 60s, and that was a pretty interesting time. And I was heavily involved in the creation of NSFNet in 1980s, and that was a pretty interesting time. And now I'm heavily involved in middleware, and this is also a very interesting time, so I feel quite lucky for this, and I feel appreciative of the opportunity to try to summarize what we talked about in the middleware track with the once and future middleware. I want to begin with a vision of how the world may look in several years, where we are today, and how we're going to get from where we are today to where we need to go. I warn you that the vision of the future was affected by what I did in Berkeley in the late 60s, so there may be problems that come back here. Simply, a vision of the future is that a researcher should be able to log into their local account and then be able to browse a digital library and, in the true tradition of academic freedom, be able to do that with privacy. Then, with a single keystroke, be able to release a block of local information from their local campus directory to populate a grid directory. Then, without logging in again, they should be able to go to a journal where they are editor and be able to do a set of commands on editing documents for that journal with the privileges of an editor, but without having to log into that system as an editor. Then they can turn and sign a grant proposal digitally and submit it. They can then move to some restricted scholarly collections and again browse those collections with privacy, but the owner of those collections knowing that a privileged person, without knowing who that person is it has been permitted. And then perhaps turn and securely use computing resources and instruments that are distributed across the world. And then perhaps synchronize some computations that are running on supercomputers at CERN and at San Diego, so that the data flows at megabits, hundreds of megabits per second, are moving back and forth. Perhaps then they will turn and look at some calendars of some colleagues that are private but able to be viewed by this person so that it can schedule a conference. Perhaps a video conference would then come up, and if you're familiar with video conferencing today, there is no control over who comes onto your screen. If you open your port for a video conference, there is no stopping anybody from coming in. And so we'd like to have that come in with a knock on the door that says, your good friend wants to have a video conference. And then perhaps the scientist or researcher will encrypt their intellectual property for protection. We want all this to happen while they're in their office, or while they're at home, or while they're at a colleague's office, and all with a simple, consistent, and intuitive interface. One of the things we worry about is that middleware is not like hardware. Middleware, anybody can write middleware code. If we're not careful, you will be besieged with thousands of different interfaces for thousands of different applications. We'd like it to be a simple interface. Just as you can climb into a rent-a-car and be able to drive it, you should be able to climb into this interface, regardless of the workstation, and manage it. So, where we may go in the next few years is the following diagram. At the bottom there is the network layer middleware. We think of things like bandwidth brokers. We think of things like secure multicast, the ability to join a multicast group with authentication. On top of that, there is the core middleware, directories, identifiers, security. And then on top of that, there is what we call upper middleware, specific tools that will be reused within a discipline. So, for example, you see the distributed computing environment upper middleware. That's a plateau in the middle of this diagram. Things like Globus and Legion. And then on top of that, individual disciplines like physics will build their tool sets. You see on the left side some applications like H323. IM stands for instant messaging, and other applications that will become directly enabled by the core middleware, so they have identifiers and directories and security associated with them. You see digital libraries, you see business applications, upperware, medical middleware, lots of other vertical stacks that will become the high rises in this picture. The integration that is in this environment needs to proceed in 3 dimensions. It must be integrated with the enterprise that you're a part of. It must be integrated with the desktop that you operate from. It must be integrated with the discipline in which you work. We need to stitch all of that together for this to be successful. That's where we want to go. Where are we today? A little away from that. We have what we call PKI. Early forms of PKI, the Hittites of PKI are in place, but we need to do a lot more work. We have some basic ideas about directories, but there is much work to do there. We have identifiers that we can't negotiate with, that we can't navigate through. And then we have the beginnings of some upper middleware in Globus. Notice no lines between these boxes, no connections today. We are early. The last few days in the middleware track, we've talked about PKI. Not only trust models, but mistrust models. How do we revoke trust? How do we cancel that mechanism? We've talked about other collaboration tools, projects that are important like PAPI from Red Iris and Shibboleth from Internet 2. We've talked about the nitty-gritty of directories. How do we build schema? How do we protect the fields in directories from denial of privacy attacks? We worry a lot about denial of privacy. How do we connect applications to directories? The plumbing and the fixtures that go to the plumbing are not yet connected. How do we get campuses and enterprises to make the investments to deploy middleware? How do we motivate them? How do we demonstrate the cost benefit to the provosts, to the chief executive officers, so they make the commitment not only of money, but of time and power to make this happen? How do we find the authoritative sources of information to feed the directory, to make sure the information in the directory is up to date? What are the applications that will drive the directory? How do we get them to help motivate the development of this structure? How do we make sure that all the work that we do is available to all of us in the room? What are the licensing structures for the software? And we've talked about how do we name objects in directories and PKI. And we've agreed on many things in the last 2 days downstairs in Session B. We agreed that middleware is as much policy as it is technology. We've agreed that a single global middleware infrastructure is our goal. We've agreed that upper middleware, like Globus, needs to connect to core middleware like campus and research directories, so that you can make the changes in your email addresses or the changes in your bookmarks or your changes in preferences in one location and have it propagate and move throughout the worlds that you live in. We agreed that our efforts in large-scale directories, should be coordinated. We've agreed that privacy is very important and very hard. There is a saying about privacy, a unified field theory of privacy that goes, my privacy is very important to me. Your privacy is not particularly important to me. I will sell my privacy for an appropriately defined toy. How do we recognize that privacy only matters to some of us. We must make it so that privacy is there for those who want it and available to be sold for those who want to sell their privacy. We've talked that we need more coordination on our policies between the communities of TERENA and the rest of the globe. We've talked about our approaches must be standard-based. And we agreed that PKI is not yet ready. And that since this space is as much policy as it is technology, we must radically simplify our policies and our roles in our organizations if we ever hope to capture those mechanisms in logic. And we agreed on a few other things. We agreed that the Dutch, French, Germans, Swiss, Italians, and Turks generally speak better English than the Americans in English speak Dutch, French, German, Italian, and Turkish. And that many Dutch, French, Germans, Swiss, and Italians speak better English than most Americans. And that there is much work to be done. So I want to end with a call to arms, an excitement about what lies ahead. We are very early in middleware, and there is a second global fabric of connectivity that must be engineered, much as we've engineered with TCP/IP. One difference, TCP/IP went across the ponds pretty easily. It was culturally independent. This will not be true with middleware, and there is much, much hard work that has to be done. So I'd like to close this summary with a call to arms, and it seems appropriate to make that call of arms by using a poem from... before I do that, I should mention what we disagreed on. We disagreed on how to link our direct readers of directories. We agreed on what trust models we should establish. Many of us in Europe have been working on a hierarchical model. In the United States, we've moved to a bridge model. That's reflective of what is the depth of trust. How many times can one delegate trust? What are the degrees of separation between cultures and people? We disagreed on whether we should create directory attributes in hopes that applications would appear, or that we wait for the applications to tell us which directory attributes we need. We've disagreed on what should be inside X509 certificates. And we're not sure on what our respective national laws allow, in particular on privacy. Now I can do the call to arms. Now I can talk about Ulysses, because it seems appropriate given where we are. So I'd like to close with one or two citations from a poem by Alfred Tennyson. I am a part of all that I have met, yet all experience is an arch wherethrough gleams that untraveled world, whose margin fades forever and forever when I move. There lies the port, the vessel's puffs her sails, there gloom the dark broad seas. Some work of noble note may yet be done, not unbecoming men that strove with gods. Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Ken. That's very impressive. I'll take two questions if anybody has burning questions for Ken. But no. Okay. Thanks very much. Could I ask the panelists to come up on the stage, please? In the left corner, we have on my far left Errol Galenby from the University of Central Florida, who was telling us 2 days ago here about his work. Then next to me on the left is Stephen Bush from GE Corporate R&D. And on my right is Steve Deering from Cisco. On the far right, the first speaker, who was asked to be provocative, is Harold Alvestan, and he feels strongly, and I was in the session that he was presenting, he's the IETF chair, that he feels strongly that IP over everything and everything over IP is the right way to be going, and that we need one and only one IP. Harold.
So, now we take the magic balls to find the right wire. This sounds like a wire. And the other magic balls while the technology burns on. A little correction to the gentleman. I was not I was not saying that we need one IP, because we have one and it's not working. So we need at least two. I hope we can I hope we can leave it at that. But we need one internet, because one internet is better than two internets. Now let's see if the magic technology works again. Wow! First time. I was asked to be deliberately proactive, and for that reason I even left my Cisco logo on. So this is what this talk is going to be. Trying to make sure that every one of you who has a new brilliant idea of how to complexify the internet so as to make life more horrid for all the managers out there can have a second thought. Subtitle is exactly what I was told to do about this talk, so no holds barred, no second thoughts. Let's go. Consider a fiber with a capacity of 10 gigabits per second, and consider the average size of an IP packet. A small packet is 40 bytes. Then pull out your pocket calculator. I literally did these calculations in the calculator of my Palm Pilot, so yes, you can do it on a pocket calculator. 32 million packets per second gives you 31 nanoseconds to make a switching decision on each packet before you have to make the next decision. In 31 nanoseconds, the clock on a gigahertz Pentium will tick over exactly 31 times. And light will have moved along the fiber about this far. So, if anyone asks you, how long is a packet? Okay. What this shows you is that if you're in a hurry, you don't have time to be complex. Keep that in mind. The other thing about complexity is memory. Consider an average router on the core of a big network, which at any time will have seen packets belonging to 1 million different flows. Consider that after storing the gigantic routing tables and the configuration files on the operating system, and perhaps a little memory left over for things like passwords and certificates, it might have 100 megabytes left for other things. 100 megabytes into 1 million flows means that you can remember 100 bytes about each flow. That's not terribly much. And when you come along with flow number 1,000,001, flow number 1 will be forgotten. You have no alternative. So if you're asking the core of your network to remember things for you, you have no choice except soft state, and you have no choice except being simple. The least scalable part of the internet is people. They don't understand much. I mean, I know I don't understand much. And Socrates had this nice callback when he was told that he was the wisest man on earth. It must be because I understand that I understand nothing. But we all know that the number of people who understand any given problem is small. And the internet, as a social fabric, is about people agreeing with each other. People don't like agreeing if they don't understand what they have agreed. And if they haven't agreed, they're not likely to connect to each other. And if it's not connected, it's not the internet. To scale the internet, what you do when you connect things together has to be understood by people. And if it's going to be understood by people, it's got to be simple. Well, the note at the bottom. If you say, okay, you have to do this complex and horrible and ugly and not understandable thing like TCP flow control, or the internet will die. They will understand what you're saying. And they might choose or might not choose to believe you. But people can agree to do complex things if you state it in simple enough terms. So there's an escape hatch there. When you trust people, exactly what does that mean? Trust is another word like switch or agent or middleware that is meaningless in and of itself. Because the internet is a cooperation between people competing with each other, which means that if they are willing to connect the networks to each other, it's because they trust that there's a limit to how much you have given away. And again, I can't understand that it's limited unless I understand it. Keep it simple. Again, people will do what works. They will deploy OSPF. I mean, they will even deploy BGP, even if they don't understand it. But if they don't understand it, they try to place walls around it so that the limits of what damage the algorithms and stuff that do, the limits of the damage they can do to them are limited. So complexity that is only visible locally is not really that horrible, because you can place bounds around it. But global complexity is hard. Michael Dell says that the problem of the internet is scaling. Number of flows, number of packets, number of users, number of routes. If you increase anything by a factor of 10, you have different problems. And we're trying to scale by factors of thousands. On all the subjects I have mentioned above, I think a central part of any answer to anything has to be keep it simple, stupid.
So, thank you, Harold, for fulfilling your mandate. In the left corner, Errol will now try to refute him.
Well, first of all, I'm very glad I'm on the left. This is a position that quite suits me. I know that, at random I might have been positioned at the center or on the right, but left is fine for me. I certainly agree that simplicity is the key. And I certainly agree with the premise of one internet. In fact, I think I agree with most of the things that the previous speaker said. Perhaps he should move over. But I thought that the discussion was really about IP or not IP. and there we may have some differences of opinion. I don't think you have to be a seer, even a Norse seer, or a druid, if you wish, to think that, like with any other standard, it's not so much an issue of whether IP will, in a certain sense, disappear at some point. It is more a matter of knowing when and at which stage. My personal vision is that IP will evolve into a software interface standard more than an effective protocol, and we're seeing that happening already with wide area LANs and so on. So I view IP as staying for a long time as some kind of legacy software interface. But I do think that IP and its patches, you have kind of extensive patches all the time going on, and you have a large body with 2,000 people meeting or more meeting to figure out what they should do next. I think that is an indication of real complexity, and I certainly agree that simplicity is the key. And the complexity makes it that routers have become extremely complex. And I would like to see greater simplicity in the basic units that we use to manage the network in the routers themselves. So simplicity, of course, is also, at the router level, is also important for reliability, for understandability, for debugging, and so on. So what I would propose is, the thesis I would propose is, first of all, one internet, definitely. We certainly need that. Simplicity, yes, definitely. I view IP as a software standard, an interface standard in the long run. And I think that we will move towards, once again, there will be attempts to move to much simpler routers rather than to extremely sophisticated, complex, and expensive routing objects. Thank you.
Thank you, Errol. Next up is Steve Deering, and I think the easiest is that we... Yeah.
Okay, that works. Okay, so now I can mostly agree with you, and also refine the question. So you refined from what Harold to say it was actually about IP or not IP, and I have to ask IP versus what else? And if the what else is active networks or programmable routers, which is what I think is maybe the only else that you might be thinking of, that just seems to me to be it leads in exactly the opposite direction of simplicity and understandability. Standards are wonderful things. They enable markets. They enable, to me, the beauty of IP is that it's it's the one standard that enables maximum flexibility both above and below. Again, the waste of the hourglass. And what it is basically boiling down exactly the minimal piece you have to standardize and you have to agree on to allow this huge capability and flexibility. And what it really is just, this is the basic function of what a router, what a switch does, which is a bundle of bits come in, you look at some bits in the header and say, okay, it goes that way. And that's pretty much what IP is. It's not connections, it's not data manipulation. It boils down what is the basic functionality that you want a network to do, which is to deliver bits. And by boiling it down to the minimum functionality, which is anything more than that is loading on extra semantics, which is bound to block off other possible avenues of evolution. So the idea to me of active networking is like having a programmable electricity system. The fact that we have a standard electrical system, at least within a country, you have standard plugs, enables people to build a zillion products that use electricity. If, in fact, we had a revolution, yesterday or in your presentation, you talked about the value, that IP was a revolution compared to, the telephone companies, and that was good, so let's have another revolution. Well, not all revolutions are good, and it's certainly not good to have revolutions frequently.
If you're on the left, you may have a different opinion.
Right. It's very odd for me to find myself on the right in any argument. I'm aware of the hazard that we defenders of IP here look like the telephone company did. I remember once reading a paper that came out of the telephony industry that referred to IP as a hostile overlay. Because basically IP subverts the billing models and everything of the phone system. And, as a radical and a revolutionary, that's great. Yes, absolutely. And now, we're the establishment and we're defending it. But, again, I come back to, I think we're iterating towards the right semantics for a network, and that just, revolution for revolution's sake is not a good argument. And certainly a revolution that produces a more complicated, a network that is malleable by anybody, seems exactly the wrong direction to me.
Okay. My name. Go ahead. I'm Steve Bush from General Electric. I want to try to create a little controversy here and disagree with everything that my partner has said. And I would like to say, first of all, that the IP, it's not so much the architecture of IP that has made it dominant now. It's the process behind it. The fact that people, creative, innovative people, not only analyzed things, but built things, tried things out, experimented, and did that rapidly, and that's what made IP successful. There are other architectures that could have been and as successful, or maybe more successful, and it's not the architecture; it's the ability or the process to be able to innovate. And I think active networking takes that to the extreme. And there's been a lot thrown around about complexity, that active networks are extremely complex. Well, I'd like to go to my slides, if I may, for a second. But first of all, I think Steve Deering mentioned evolution. And if simplicity is the better thing, we'll evolve towards simplicity. But let me go to my slides. How do I turn this on?
The techno break strikes again. We should evolve this towards simplicity.
Okay. One thing I wanted to mention was, for the people that sat through my active network talk, there's the source code that implements it. Speaking of the fact that innovation and experimentation can occur, the source code that implements it can be found freely available from SourceForge. And you can play with it, experiment with it, and find out really how complex or not, or simple that it is. Also, there's a book mentioned on top there. Now, I want to go back towards the issue of complexity here. The word complexity has been thrown around quite a bit in this discussion. And on the left, you see legacy networks, Shannon entropy, and the Shannon limit for compression and so forth. And that's fine legacy work for finding the minimum amount of data that can travel through a system. But with active networks on the right, we should be looking more in terms of Kolmogorov and Kolmogorov complexity, and the idea of exchanging programs rather than passive bits. Algorithmically, you can store much more data and have much more of an impact or much more information in a programmatic form. And exchanging these programs, although it can be done at a high level with IP, pushing it into the network and allowing people to evolve and carry the protocol with the packet it is a revolution, but I think it will evolve towards the right way to go and make that evolution much easier. Let me go. All right. Just the brief overview of active networks. Faster hardware that's more fully utilized. In other words, there are users out there And they don't care whether the processing is done in the middle of the network, on the edges of the network, on the moon, where it's done. They want their work done. They want security. They want ambient. They want to be able to do their work anywhere. They want flexibility. We do want to minimize global agreement. I certainly agree with that. And again, I think active networks allows people to put information in their packets that, look at how long IPv6 has taken to come about. It enables on-the-fly experimentation and obviously faster deployment of new services. So again, if active network framework were the standard, I think a lot of this stuff could happen a lot faster.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, everybody. So I will now disagree with some of the things that the panel has said. I'm not at all sure that I want only one internet. I certainly want to be able to belong to the worldwide internet, and we only want one of those. But I think I want to be able to have my private internet to do my work, and in this context, not so much my private work, because then you'll be wanting to belong to the global internet. But research activities that your community has decided to carry out, or business activities that your business has decided to carry out, I don't see why they have to be, why they shouldn't be based on your own private internet. I think that increases simplicity and increases privacy. And I think if we had Bill Santano here, he would basically say that looking forward to the time when we can use wavelength switching to create virtual private networks is going to be analogous to the move from the mainframe, which is today's internet, to the mini-computer world that started in the late 60s. And a challenge for the panelists: what is this system that has created such small packets that even with very low packet loss, you can't get decent data transfer speeds? Your 10 gigabit line is giving you some tiny fraction of that if what you really want to do is to move a large amount of data from one side of the world to the other. Whether we blame that on IP or other things, it isn't satisfying me as a user.
At least the packets are bigger than ATM.
That is indeed correct, but on average, as we saw from Harold's presentation, they are not bigger than.
No, that wasn't the average. Size. The average is around 100, I think.
Right. Who in the audience wants to join in this punch-up? We're all reserved Europeans. I know this problem. We have someone at the back? No? Right. Case.
I might see another threat to IP, or at least where IP might vanish, although I would probably not believe my own statement, which I'm now going to make, but just to provoke discussion. Currently, you see that everywhere few lambdas are deployed, and whatever the lambda means and how far everybody sees the lambda, or if there's just an interconnection between routers, is to be debated elsewhere.
Sorry, can you speak slightly slower and louder? I can't, even I can't hear what's going on.
Okay. Optical networking. So suppose that in a few years from now we have a real abundance of lambdas, and that lambdas will stick everywhere to the edge of the network. So where is the IP then going to be, and where is the responsibility for maintaining IP consistency going to be? So if you have really an abundance of lambdas, and that lambdas really stick to the end user's desks, and the tunnels terminate there, what is that going to change to the structure of internet at large.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, sure.
What do you consider an abundance? So I don't think you will ever have enough lambdas to establish your own private circuit to every destination you might want to talk to. You're going to have 100 or maybe 1,000, but you're talking to millions of possible destinations. So clearly, there's still routers out there. We're not going to replace the internet with a mesh of everyone to everyone else. And there's a real question about. So yes, in fact, optical switching will allow you to do switched virtual circuits and establish them, and they will become visible to the IP routing. Whether or not it's wise or helpful to exploit that switching capability at a high rate is a big open question to me. Because, in fact, in the end, you do have to satisfy the routing. And if you've got a bunch of circuits coming into existence and disappearing on a microsecond or millisecond basis, that's going to make IP's job awfully hard. And especially if you want to be able to get to all of those other destinations that you can't afford to establish a direct fiber to. I think you need to think about that. This also gives me the opportunity to push back a little bit on this private network notion. The analogy with a PC seems to me to be very stretched because a network by nature involves more than one party, whereas a PC is personal. And so the notion of a private network, a network that you can only talk to yourself, is not very interesting. And so indeed, networking does require cooperation. You'll never have, the personal network is not very interesting.
Okay, let me try and respond a bit to both of those. It's clear, how many lambdas do you need? Well, 10. You want to communicate very fast with maybe 10 minus 9 plus 89 different places around the world where performance is very important to you and where you are willing to invest in that performance. That's and then everything else goes into the general internet. We would not be wanting to give that up. Absolutely not. But we want to be able to get very good performance to people that we're in business, in research business with.
I don't think that...
Just push ourselves a little bit, perhaps out of our local minimum where we seem to be trapped. I'm sorry. Yes, I was referring to the danger of a panel trapped in a local minimum. I'm sure the physicists here will appreciate that analogy. But basically, the issue of the number of addresses, let me not call these IP addresses, but addresses that we will be interested in handling is quite important. You may think that a reasonable number of addresses would be a multiple of the number of people on Earth. You take the number of people on Earth, you take their environments. This room, for instance, in a few years may have 10,000 addresses associated with it, just simply because you may have active sensors in the surrounding environment, things which dim the lights when it's necessary, turn them on again when that it becomes necessary. When the projector comes on, you may have the main lights dimming down automatically to a certain level, and so on. So you will have extremely information-rich environments in which we will be operating, and we will want to be able to talk to these environments and address them and exchange information, not just at the human level, but the environments will want to talk to each other. So we're talking about a very large number of addresses, which means that this idea that we will have so many lambdas to cover everyone is probably unreasonable. We will still not have enough lambdas to deal with all of this. So this is one thing that's quite important. The other important aspect I think that we need to consider as we revisit the whole issue of routing is that it's becoming very easy to know where a router is in a precise manner. So perhaps even if IP doesn't evolve in the active network direction that we've been talking about, there may be other evolutions as well. For instance, we may have geographic routing becoming much more important, just using naturally. I want to go to China, therefore I have to go. I'm here. I have to go east from here. That kind of thing, and we may revisit all the routing issues in a way that we are not used to thinking about things right now. So I think we should avoid, we should keep, the research community certainly should keep a very open mind about the way things will go. I think that the idea of having simple systems, having a one internet, even though, of course, you want to give the freedom of groups to have their own private networks according to interoperability standards and so on, that's important. But still, I think the world is a changing world, and we should never think that something is at its some form of optimum.
Yeah, if I could just obviously active networks are a great area to experiment with these various types of routing mechanisms that don't depend on fixed addressing, which as we see runs out. So I just wanted to emphasize that. Please go ahead and review it.
I think the technology described as active networks in the talk I listened to in the plenary, which might be very different from what other people call active networks, looks like a just fine new paradigm for a subnetwork routing protocol. But the whole idea of shipping around programs for other people to execute runs into a little problem called a few small problems. One of them is called the halting problem, which is that if you have anything that can decently be called a program with expressive power enough to express interesting questions, there's no way short of executing it forever to figure out whether the program will halt or not. Which means that either you have interesting edge effects when the automatic timers cut you off, or you have an open invitation to denial of service tax from anyone you trust to do anything. It's little details like this that worry complexity freaks like me.
Great. Can I respond to that? We've done some work with NIST, that's the National Institute of Standards in the United States, involving, that is a great concern. The fact that denial of service and viruses and so forth in an active network would really wreak havoc. So what NIST has done is looked at various alternatives for benchmarking applications, and we've put together a demo, which I talked about in my talk earlier this week, of cutting off packets that exceed a certain amount of time, either because they were maliciously designed to cause denial of service or because they were programmed ineffectively or had mistakes in them.
There's no way to tell the difference between a malicious hacker and a stupid one.
Correct. The stupid packets will be... Well, first of all, you have different processors. I mean, you have slow processors, fast processors, a whole heterogeneous system. So you have to be able to be certain that you don't kill off a packet just because he's running on a slow processor, for example. So we do have mechanisms to be very careful about how much time and how much execution a particular packet would take.
So this is what Java promised. And I think of active networking as Java for routers, basically. But even Java for workstations, for endpoints, I'm not intimately familiar with that, but I think a lot of the promises of security and the notion that you could bound both the execution time and you could protect your disk system and so on has turned out to be a lot more challenging and not exactly delivered on.
Oh, well, let's talk about security in the IT world. I mean, you look at the band-aids.
You're avoiding the question, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Look at the band-aids that have been put on top of IT in order to try to implement security. And I think you were arguing earlier in the week about having the crunchy outer layer and the soft middle.
Right.
And could you explain that again? I'm not sure I buy that argument.
Oh, okay. We just changed topics again. That was so the current model of security for most people in the internet is a firewall, and the firewall gives you the type of security which I refer to as crunchy on the outside and a nice soft chewy interior.
And a firewall is very much like an active device. But
Right. And so it has the problem that as soon as you breach the firewall, everything's wide open. And in fact, many of the security threats that people face today come from people who are already inside the firewall, disgruntled employees, rogue software, and so on inside the company. So I think we need to move much more to an end-to-end security model where individual hosts are verifying the authenticity of their packets, filtering, and so on, rather than this sort of this one device that sort of creates a security perimeter but doesn't do anything about defending from attacks internally.
Well, I think that people who engineer security would like to understand more about the brittle nature that we're discussing, about the hard outer layer, and be able to quantify that and engineer that to their desires. In other words, you may want firewalls that bend into the network or bend back out of the network, and networks that can reconstitute on the fly once they may be compromised. I mean, you want...
How are you ever going to figure out what's going on? How are you going to know you're secure when you've got this infinitely malleable network that can do all sorts of things and can behave in different ways at the user's whim? When things don't work, how will you ever diagnose it?
Well, let me ask another question. How many of these firewalls work at 10 gigabits a second? Right. Audience. The panel have been enjoying themselves. Nothing extra. Right. In that case, I give the panel 1 2-minute slot each, and then we're through. Shall we start on the left or on the right? Who in the audience votes that we start on the left? Raise your hand. Who votes to start on the right? A clear majority.
Okay. The success factor of the Internet is not its technology, it's what the technology enabled, which is a community. The community depends on a very simple network continuing to operate. And because it has low expectations of the network, it's usually not disappointed. I regard complexity of what the community has to expect from the network as a threat to the community. The community we created by creating an internet where the ones who created it were the ones who were using it. My concern for the internet is to preserve and extend the human community of the internet. I love to play with technology, but first of all, I want the internet community to survive.
Oh, I'm out of profound things to say. I just want to... So I'll use my minute to respond to something else. I think... so to just agree with my colleagues on the left, that indeed there are lots of issues with IP that still need work. There are lots of improvements that need to be made. Routing is clearly an area that needs lots of development. I don't think anything we're saying in talking about one internet or one internet protocol is in any way conflict with making the routing different or better. And in fact, I've also thought a lot about geographic style addressing and so on. I think there's clearly work to be done there. What's important about the one IP and the one internet is the service interface. You referred to it as a software interface, and in some ways that's right. It's the fact that there's this very simple model of what an IP packet looks like and what you can expect if you put it in the network. And the thing that concerns me about active networking is what you can expect when you put a packet in the network now becomes undefined. So what's important is this very simple API for what the network does. And
I guess I'm also out of profound things to say, I suppose, other than I am a strong advocate of active networking and the fact that a free market type of environment for research is essentially what it would provide, and that we would hopefully converge to optimal mechanisms, whether they be routing, management, control of complexity. And in fact, it will force us to measure complexity. And I mean different forms of complexity, much more than we've had to. In other words, it will add a stress and a challenge, which will make us rise to that challenge in terms of measuring and controlling complexity as well.
Well, I don't know how many people here attended EARN and BitNet meetings. Perhaps not too many, but I attended 2 or 3. And what Harold said about maintaining a is probably what was said at the panel at one of the EARN and BitNet meetings. He said we have to preserve BitNet and EARN because this is a community, and here comes this bad internet stuff, and it's going to create problems for us. So I think the community stays. And moves along as better technology comes along. That's the issue. The question then is we want to maintain interfaces, software interfaces, or standards, or things of that nature. But we also want to continue exploring better ways to do things as the environment in which we work changes, as optics comes along, as very high rates become available, as we need to differentiate services. There are those who have to send large physics experiments across the world, others who want to send email. As all of these things happen, as geographic routing becomes possible, we want to be able to explore different technologies and still preserve a single broad mode of communication, which has been a very, very useful thing for all of us. We want to keep that. We want to keep the one internet in a broad sense. So those are my concluding remarks.
So I think I would like to thank all of the panel. I will make a 1-minute conclusion as well. We, the people on the panel, the people in the room, are the community. The community is also bigger than the people in the room. It's all your users and colleagues back home. We've got to keep the internet working. It's a far from trivial job. In history, there have been few examples of things, zero examples as far as I know, of things that have grown so fast. We've got to evolve it. We have to do that and keep enough flexibility and avoid being over-rigid, because unless you avoid sclerosis, you get serious health problems. I'd like to thank all the panelists for their contributions, and we can now stop the panel and we end up with some other things at the end of this session. Thanks a lot. Okay, thanks a lot. Right. Now. So the panel is being presented with a sun protection device.
My parasol.
Right, we are getting to the end of the conference, and I need to find my notes. So Michael Walsh is the TERENA Vice President in charge of conferences, and he will now have a few things to tell us.
Thank you, David. I want to offer you some brief reflections on the conference, and follow that up with some thanks to various people who have been involved. The TERENA Annual Conference, it's our main get-together for the community, that term again, community, which I understand to be the networks and their users right down to the applications user at the desktop. It's a conversation occasion. We have our formal sessions like this one and like the others, where mainly you sit and listen and a few people speak. But around the boundaries, coffee breaks, evenings, we have our real conversations. And this week I've heard a real buzz about the place, which gives me a feeling that good work was done, new friends were made, and old friends were met again. I think typically at these conferences about 50% of the attendance is new. I recognize many old faces and I see many new faces. So I'm confident that we've had many new attendees this time. And I look forward to meeting you again next year. To remind you that our participants, the TERENA community, is the national research networks and the users. Participants in the conference is our international colleagues from the United States and other continents, industry, very important, but also policymakers and government and the EU. One or two thoughts listening through the sessions. I think Professor Pack in the opening session challenged us. I'm not sure how many of us tend to listen to the opening formal session and the opening speaker. But this time Professor Pack would have warranted very careful attention. He spoke about the dangers for emerging economies in developing countries of globalization. He spoke about the dangers of globalization for emerging economies, but he recognized that it cannot be resisted. It has to be managed and modulated as best as possible. And he reminded us that networking and open access to information is a key to development. But he also said that these developments come with political motivations. Suppliers, funders, global agencies, World Bank, European Investment Bank, various other agencies come with political motivations as well. Nothing is politically neutral anymore. That means that we have to be concerned about our political position and our ethical stance in relation to what we do as we bring our global infrastructure further out into developing and emerging markets. It also means that we must concern ourselves more than before, with legislation, governance and control. And Ken this morning reminded us that this is very much an issue for us now in our new initiatives in middleware. It's also important to remember that the initiatives we have started many years ago with academic and research networks were at that time seen as inherently global projects. And Bill St. Arno and others during the week have reminded us of the importance of that. The service we're providing, the infrastructure we're trying to develop, is also aimed at perhaps one of the few communities of interest which perceives itself as global, and that's the global intellectual community of researchers and educationalists. Another thing to mention is the middleware stream. This was, to some extent for the conference, an innovation. It was let me put it, lightly programmed. Intense discussion, a few presentations. The focus was on discussion. There was a lot of heat. Some very vigorous debates took place yesterday. But in the end, all was light. And some of those discussions I know, because I was there for part of them, ended in the exchange of business cards and working out agreement on how then to cooperate after, I suppose, that element of trust was developed through the debate and the argument. We've seen genuine advances now this week in US-Europe cooperation in this whole area of directory services and PKI, and Ken talked about that this morning. But a thing we must remember here again, going back to an earlier point, is that the policy and the technology are intertwined in a way that is going to be very difficult to disentangle. And this is new for this community. We have, in these conferences, every year had policy streams and technology streams. And in the policy streams, you would see the odd technologist dozing off, bored with those bureaucrats. And in the technology streams, the odd bureaucrat would go in and listen and wonder what it was all about. We don't have that luxury anymore. We have to understand both sides of these issues, until perhaps someday we manage to disentangle and decouple them and let the bureaucrats and the policymakers and the lawyers go in one direction and the technologists continue on. We're not there, and we're a long way away from it. The whole middleware and related area challenges the competencies of our national research networks. Very few of us have the scope of understanding of the issues. We're still teasing out what this means, what it implies in terms of resources and capabilities. In particular, it's going to challenge the universities, who are going to have to implement this stuff, and are going to have to start soon, now. That brings me along to my third point, the question of outreach to the campus. We had a discussion on the last mile. I like to think of it sometimes as the first mile. It's the first mile and the last mile. It's an end-to-end issue. We've been talking for many, many years about end-to-end service. We now need end-to-end performance, and we have heard throughout the week that we don't have that, and we're a long way away from it. We need in the campuses to deliver middleware and grid applications infrastructures. We're no longer challenged at the campus just by providing bandwidth and connectivity, although we know from this week that even that is a challenge, but to build the applications infrastructure so that the end user in the lab, in the office, in the research center can exploit the infrastructures that are being developed in the wide area. This is further complicated by the fact that this is all continuing work in progress. We heard this morning in the grid presentations that all of this is still being teased out. But we can't wait until it's complete before we start implementing. We can't wait for products. We have to begin to learn how to do it. And then we have these discontinuities at the boundaries with the NRENs. We have discontinuities at the boundary between the NRENs and international connectivity. But the scaling problem there is at least manageable. When we get down to the campus, the numbers are very large. And we have organizational boundaries, technical boundaries, boundaries of responsibility, which do need to be dealt with. We've had some discussions on the sort of investments that are going to be required here. And one figure that was plucked out in discussion was that we need, within the US, of the order of $10 billion worth of investment to bring the university infrastructures up to the standard of the best. Don't know what that would be in Europe, maybe 2-3 times that. And when you extend that to the rest of the developing world, well, it's a massive number. And we're faced at the campus level with problems of vision, with problems of developing strategy and funding. And the funding has to be local and national, primarily. The vision has to be local, but what's going to stimulate that vision? So I'd like to challenge both the NRENs and TERENA to begin an outreach program to the end users, remembering that our community is not just the NRENs, but also the users. Okay. I want to move on now and just thank a few people. We have the speakers, discussion leaders, without whom we would probably not really have had very much discussion. The local organizers, very important, and especially the conference support staff who are all around us now today in the room. And people who are often forgotten, the TERENA staff, who really work away all the time in the background from 6 o'clock in the morning until 3 o'clock the next morning to make sure things work here for us. And then you, the people who've attended and who've made this the pleasure it has been for me to attend and to help organize. So David, would you like to do a little duty and offer thanks to a few of those people in the usual way?
That would indeed be a pleasure, but let's thank Michael for his words.
I'm not finished with my few words, David, yet. Oh,
to get the presenter up as well? No, right. Okay. So, we have been here in Antalya, and the conference center is under the auspices of the Talya Hotel. It's our great pleasure to thank everybody who's in the back, and the presentation will be to Mr. Mehta Atil. The Turkish National Research Network, ULAK-BIM, has been working very, very hard to make sure that we are well connected and well served. And I'd like you to thank Chan Bichan for their support. And the organization of much of the booking and helping people to go on excursions has been looked after by Setur, and Banu Saiman will please come forward.
Okay. Our esteemed guests, I would like to share this happiness with my team, if you permit. Setur team. Can you please come? Okay, I would like to say something to you. Our esteemed guests, this is just a short note to say goodbye from the land of tolerance and love. The famous Turkish philosopher Mevlana, who lived in Konya during the 13th century, brought forth to society a humanistic understanding which is admired by people even today and reflects the spirit of superior and limitless tolerance of the Turkish society with these words: come, come again, whoever, whatever you may be, come. Heathen, fire worshipper, sinner of idolatry, come. Come, even if you broke your penitence 100 times. Ours is not the portal of despair or misery. Come. In these lines, Mevlana summed up the feelings of the whole Turkish nation. The qualifications which allow the Turkish nation as a society to be labeled humanistic are recorded on the most honorable pages of the history and continue to be recorded to this day. Hope, apart from the intensive and comprehensive scientific program, you also found in our land a people who combine hospitality with friendly laughter and understand the good things of life, from the value of excellent cuisine to the importance of high art. A hearty goodbye until next time. A hearty applause all to you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, perhaps I can add one point there. Those of you, and that will not be so many people in the room, that belong to the TERENA General Assembly, know that 18 months ago we had our General Assembly in Istanbul. And at that time, Turkey was just recovering from a very severe earthquake. And since then, they have had, earlier this year, very severe economic problems, and the whole question of the development of Turkish society and politics is, as those of you that know, that follow it a little bit, it's quite complicated. So I think we should wish all of our Turkish hosts who've been extremely generous to us all the best in the future, and really our very best wishes. I have, or actually Carol has, one last presentation to make, and that's to Michael Walsh. Michael changed employers recently, and he is going to stop being on the TERENA executive, and where he's been responsible for conferences for the last 4 years. Michael's been working in research networking for very close on 25 years, and it's really been a great pleasure and privilege for me to know him and work with him, and I think I can say that for many of us in the room too.
Oh, thank you very much. Oh, lovely. Thank you very much. There's just one or two final people to mention. Our program committee, and Stefano Trumpi in the front row, who is the chair of the program committee. Thank you. These people work on a volunteer basis and do sometimes very difficult and stressful work in order to pull together events like this. So we should thank them, wish them well, and particularly thank those on that list who are preparing to serve again under next year the chairmanship of François Flückischer from CERN. You see the list there, some old, some new, some continuity, some new blood. Thank you very much. I think John Boland, who is the Chief Executive of HEAnet and the host of next year's conference in Ireland, would like to say a few words now to try to encourage you to come back next year and have as much fun and as much pleasure there. Is John available?
Okay, thank you, Michael. I'm pleased to announce that the event will be hosted by the Irish National Research Network, HEAnet, next year. So it's going to be hosted in Ireland on the University of Limerick campus between June the 3rd and June the 6th. You'll all have a rough idea where Ireland is, stuck out in the North Atlantic Ocean. You may not be so sure of where Limerick is. It's actually about 190 kilometres from Dublin. And it's well served by an international airport. There are direct flights from a large number of European airports and US airports, as well as very, very frequent flights from Dublin. It's accessible by train and road from Dublin as well. So as I say, it's going to be hosted in a university environment next year. University of Limerick. You'll notice right across the front there, we have lush green grass everywhere. And that comes to us courtesy of a very generous rainfall that we have in Ireland. So some people say that we don't have a climate in Ireland, we just have an awful lot of weather. However, I must say that coming out here, I left 10 days of unbroken sunshine to come out to torrential rain, so you never know. Okay, the actual event will be in a separate concert hall complex. It's one of two national concert halls in Ireland, so it's quite a comprehensive complex on the university campus. The region is in the west of Ireland by the Shannon River. There's lots of historical buildings. Adair Manor is a fine hotel, but you'd probably need to speak to the EC for some framework funding to stay there. But you can visit. You can play golf, about €50 for a round. Bunratty Castle, and here we have the equivalent of Irish belly dancing. So, as you can see, it'll be a little bit different, but don't worry, we'll make it interesting too. The west of Ireland and the southwest of Ireland, there's lots of rugged scenery, lots of good landscape, rivers and lakes, lots of activity there. So we're planning to have an interesting networking event in Ireland, but interesting technically and socially. So look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you.
Carol will kill me if I don't tell you to fill in your evaluation forms. We do rely on them. So somebody has to tell me if I've forgotten anything. I don't think so. I think it is now my pleasure to thank the audience and to declare the TERENA Conference 2001 closed.